I think the so-called trade war obviously has been going on for quite a while. I think our expectation is that there will also be some positive developments coming up in the next month or so, with the likelihood of signing the phase one agreement towards ultimately reaching a more of a sort of a complete agreement between the two countries. And I think all indications that with the phase one agreement, there will be some type of rollback of the tariffs that already been put in place. So I believe that's all very positive. I think at the end of the day, between U.S. and China, the sort of symbiotic relationship is always very strong, and it will continue to be very strong. So I don't think either country. Let's put it this way: I don't think it's in either country's interest to have a prolonged trade war. So I believe everyone's, both parties are working towards reaching a agreement. So it's interesting. Well, so here in the U.S., in the near term at least, we are focusing on the broker-dealer business, and that has three lines of businesses. The first one is cross-border M&A, really helping Chinese corporates to make investments and acquisitions and so on here in the U.S. and elsewhere. The second line of business is really helping Chinese companies to come here to the U.S. For IPO to list in the U.S. And the third line of business is more of a longer term. We're building a platform to really help U.S. institutional investors to invest in China, Asia. So amongst those three lines of businesses, I would say the first one, the cross-border M&A, there's been a pretty big impact on that, given the trade discussions, and particularly with the increased scrutiny in the form of CFIUS and so on. So the U.S. sellers are very reluctant to engage with Chinese buyers, and Chinese buyers are also very cautious when they look at making acquisitions here in the U.S. So that business that's definitely being, I would say, in the near term, has been fairly a significant impact. My expectation is that over time, that's going to bounce back, and just like in any other business, there's always going to be ups and downs, and then we're unfortunately are at the sort of a trough from in that piece of business. So the second piece of business, which is the U.S. IPO, and that business has been going very strong, I would say, overall. Last year, there were a total of 33 Chinese companies that came to the United States to list an IPO here in the United States. And this year so far, we have about 20 companies that have already listed here, and we have about at least another dozen or so Chinese companies have filed publicly to list here, and that's not counting many more that are perhaps under confidential filing. So that as I say, and in our own discussion with Chinese entrepreneurs of venture capital firms, indicate that continues to be a very strong interest there, and similarly in our discussion with the U.S. investors, there's a very healthy demand, continue to be very healthy demand for Chinese IPOs. So that business, what we have seen is really hasn't been impacted. The third line of business is more of a longer term, which is that we wanted to bring Huatai's, our parent company's, research products and corporate access products here, and we have a team here that's very experienced that we can work with U.S. institutional investors, offer those researchers and corporate access to U.S. institutional investors, and really help them make decisions, make investment decisions when it comes to investing in China, Asia. I think longer term, that's a very positive trend. Obviously driven by a number of factors. One is, Chinese economy continues to grow, even though people say it's 6% is low. But any major economies will die to have a 6% growth. So I think it's growing still very fast. I think China's middle class is large and continues to grow rapidly. I think that's all very attractive to U.S. institutional investors, and in the last year or two, we have all these major index companies in the world, starting with MSCI, and then 50 and S&P. They have all started including A shares in their indices, which means that the U.S. institutional investors will now become more and more interested in really investing in China, Asia, domestic equities, and that's a trend that we see is going to, long term, is going to be very, very positive, and we're very bullish on that. Again, as the statistics have shown, certainly over the last couple of years, the growth has slowed down a bit from the old sort of 8% growth to a little over 6%, and now potentially maybe 6% or so. So it definitely has slowed down, but I think just like everywhere else, I think China is going through some structural changes. The technology is playing more and more a much bigger role. China is investing a lot of capital in artificial intelligence, and that's going to play a big role in the economy. And I think the government is undertaking a number of policies to really help the private sector and so on. So I think while it has slowed down a bit, I think my expectation is that the economy is very residual, very resilient, and it's going to bounce back. There is certainly a effort to move the economy more away from manufacturing and more into service-driven economy. I think China has made significant progress in that, and will continue to make progress in that, and that's also going to help the economy to grow over time. I think I would advise young people to have a more global mind, not necessarily just you have to work here in the States. And I think you're right. In the current environment, I think employers are becoming more and more selective in terms of who they wanted to hire, and I think people perhaps are not as willing as they used to be in terms of sponsoring sort of a incoming class for work visa and others. And again, that might be a temporary phenomenon, and things may change, right? But at least at the moment, that seems to be the environment that we're operating. In the meantime, companies like Huatai, we are doing a big sort of global recruiting. So a lot of Chinese firms, whether it's in the financial services industry or other sectors, they're really looking to hire, the recruiting, that when they do recruiting, they look at it at more of a global scale, global basis. So I think there are a lot of good opportunities that are being offered by companies like Huatai Securities, and and obviously companies in China like Huatai, we're experiencing significant growth. So I think it's a great opportunities for young people to really have that first job and gain significant experience in the sector. So I would say certainly continue to look to look for opportunities here, but I certainly should not just limit yourself to thinking that you have to be here, because I think there are a lot of more opportunities coming from companies in China.